Okay, so this particular class, if you've been in a class with me before, you know that I tend to monopolize the conversation, and I tend to lecture and have a pretty strict agenda, what I'm going to talk about for the class. In this particular class, I tend to let go a little bit, right? So I tend to really create the space to hear some of you for two reasons. First of all, the directions that we end up going often are not the directions I had planned, but they're better. So from my experience teaching this class, I started, I think, a couple of times already. Students always lead me to strange new places, which I actually find much more interesting in the end than what I had planned to say. So I'm interested like that. The other thing is that students actually have really interesting interpretations when they are let loose like this. And I've actually occasionally used some of your interpretations in my own publications. So this is also for me, right? This is kind of a laboratory for me. This is my main research is actually focusing on the Hebrew Bible. So I like to have this lab with you guys where I kind of leave a lot of room for you to think and to interpret on your own, because it actually gives me ideas sometimes. I do make footnotes and recognize people in my publications. But yeah, so I tend to kind of go more with the flow in a class like this, which means that the syllabus we should see the syllabus a little bit like this, right? Sometimes we'll be a little behind, I think. So just make sure you attend the class so you know what's coming next, right? So I'm going to try and stick to the syllabus, but sometimes we'll be a little bit off because maybe someone came up with an amazing discussion and we had to keep going and we weren't able to finish, right? Okay. So any questions on this or comments before I get into what I was going to say? Okay. So I want to go briefly over my definition of patriarchy so we can all be on the same page, right? And you can understand also a little better why I praised it like I did yesterday or last time, right? What am I, and also why I think that when I talk about patriarchy, I'm not talking about merely white supremacy, right? Some of you seem to say that if you're not a white woman, it's a terrible situation. If you're a white woman, it's better. I'm going to talk about patriarchy in general as it spans throughout different cultures, right? You see this definition of patriarchy all over the world. You see it in the continent of Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, and so forth. So I'm going to give a very general and charitable definition of patriarchy. And then I'm going to show how we're going to move away from it here and why, right, in this particular class. Okay, so first of all, here's how I am understanding patriarchy. I'm going from the definition that I would see in the Hebrew context, right? When I'm reading the Bible, I'm seeing the patriarchal culture there, and I'm deriving my definition from what I'm observing in the Hebrew Bible, but you see this obviously in other cultures, right? So basically this, patriarchy, here's the definition that I want to use in the class. It's a society, Western or non-Western, where man is responsible for everything, man in terms of the male gender, right? So they're the ones who are not just, in position of authority, they are in a position of authority because ultimately the buck stops with them. They are responsible for everything, right? They carry this heavy responsibility of the society's well-being and survival, right? Now, the way man typically does fulfill his responsibility is by creating rules. So every patriarchal society has very clear set of rules spanning over anything, right? The relationships between neighbors, relationships between spouses, relationships between parents and children, right? This is a society, patriarchal society usually has very clear rules which dictate how the people should act. Why? So that the society can thrive and survive, right? I'm being very generous right now with patriarchy, right? This is healthy patriarchy, right? I'm totally against demonizing it, right? I really believe there is a healthy version of it, but nevertheless problematic, we're gonna see, right? So now going to so patriarchy is fine on all of these levels, except when it becomes problematic, especially when it comes to the rules dictating gender relations, right? This is where women start to what's the word? You know how a cat, you know, when they're pissed, the hair goes up. What's the word for that? Is there a word for that? I know there's a word, but I forgot. Right? This is where we women start to. There's a word, but I'm forgetting what that word is.
Is it
So,
catty?
what?
Catty?
So yeah, but it's like a kind of like nervous reaction,
Like
allergic reaction. What?
Like you tingle, your hair is standing up on its
Yeah,
end.
yeah, yeah, something like that. That's what I'm thinking about, right? This is where women start to like stiffen up, right? So let's talk about it, right? So when it comes to gender relations, right, patriarchy has written a number amount of rules. And again, this is all over cultures. You see this everywhere. This is not a European or a Western thing, right? This is in every continent. So the rules, I've noted three main rules. Actually, yeah, three, one, two, three, four. Four main rules. Why is this not here? Huh, okay. Yeah, four main rules that dictate gender relations, and which we will see the text that we'll study will kind of try to loosen up a bit. Right, number one, the rules of courtship. Number two, the rules of virginity. Number three, the rules of modesty. And number four, the rules of marriage. Okay, so I'm going to write them all down. Courtship, virginity, marriage, modesty. Okay, these are four set of rules that you see throughout the world, right, which is supposed to guide not just the woman, but gender relationships in general. Now, we'll talk about these rules in a second, how they become problematic, but we have to see, right, that the goal of these rules is really the protection of the relationship, right, in a healthy version of patriarchy, right? You have rules about courtship. This is in order to ensure that the couple will thrive, will be well fitted to each other, they will be compatible. The rules of virginity obviously is there to make sure that, you know, the relationship is monogamous from the start, right? Number three, the rules of modesty to ensure that, you know, the woman behaves in a way that is not, you know, triggering to the male. And then number four, I see some, I'm already sensing some of you shivering with horror by the way I'm describing this. Bear with me for a bit. And then for the rules of marriage, right, ensuring that the relationship is protected from outside interference, right? Let's try to see the goodwill here behind these rules, right? I know it's hard for some of us. For some of us, see, there's two kinds of people in this class. They're the ones who are ascribing to patriarchy, and they're the ones who are revolting against it, right? So I want all of us to be on the same page that there are some good things about patriarchy, at least the healthy version I'm describing right now. Are you hearing me right now? Is everyone on the same page, at least so far? Put your hand in the screen if you're following. Anybody not on the same page? I'm seeing some long faces.
I am not exactly sure what you mean by healthy patriarchy versus, I'm assuming, sick or non-healthy.
Okay, yeah, we'll get to that. So I'm going to show how patriarchy can go bad, right? But in its intention, right, I want us to at least acknowledge that the intention here, there is the intention to protect the relationship and often to protect the woman, right? So the problem, now we're getting into the issues, right? And this is a problem even with healthy patriarchy. Unhealthy patriarchy, we could see it as pure domination, right? The woman has no say, no agency. In a healthy form of patriarchy, woman does have some agency, and we're going to see how, right? I'm going to mention it when I talk about these four. So there are very unhealthy forms of patriarchy. I'm thinking, for example, in the Taliban, right, context. This is patriarchy at its extreme, right? The woman is completely covered. She's not able to, there's absolutely no say, right? She cannot get educated, right? There's a lot of problems, right, in that particular society. This is a very extreme form of patriarchy, right? I'm talking about the more healthy, balanced forms, which are not there to ensure male domination, but are there to ensure the survival of the society, right? Unhealthy patriarchy is about complete domination. Healthy patriarchy is about surviving, keeping the society in a way that it can survive. Yes. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so does that answer your question, first of all, Stajic, about the unhealthy patriarchy? Are you following?
Honestly, you're talking about patriarchy, and you said you want to go through what was it, Genesis 1 through 11. Genesis 3:16 states your husband will dominate you. So
So we are not there yet, Staich. Wait until we get to Genesis 3, which, by the way, you need to be prepared in this class for everything to be turned upside down. I'm going to give you some interpretations you have never heard before.
well, no, it's not my interpretation. It's clear in the Bible. It's not a lot, like I said the last class. It's a lot of people misunderstand what the Bible says, and in this case, domination. People are saying that some say domination is. This is what I heard from some people, that it's okay to mistreat women. Now, this is a completely different issue. I don't know if that's where you're going with the problems with patriarchy, which is
yeah, this is the unhealthy version of patriarchy when it becomes
okay.
pure domination versus the good of the society, right? But there is a healthy form of patriarchy, which is, thinking about the good of the society. Goldstein.
Okay.
Goldstein, go ahead.
Yeah, just based on your definition of patriarchy, I'm not either understanding how there can be a healthy version when even the original version is so one-sided.
That's a really good observation, right? Let me not use the word healthy. Let me use the word benevolent. Is that better? You're right. It's not healthy if it's one-sided. It's not a healthy relationship, but it is good. It is well-intentioned, right? You can be well-intentioned and unbalanced, right? For example, a parent can be well-intentioned and they are in a position of authority. So I will change it. You're right. I like that. Does it fit better the notion of well-intentioned?
I'm going to push back again. Not really, because if a parent is kind of controlling their child's life and making all the rules for them, it's not well-intentioned.
Okay, so let's be careful, because in the patriarchy I'm describing, the woman does have a say, right? If we look, for example, at the stories of the Bible, Rebecca is asked, do you want to marry him, right? Isaac. Her opinion is asked, right? So you do have, right, this is a kind of patriarchy where the woman is not forced, right, to do things she doesn't want to do, but there are still pretty strict rules as to what both genders can do, right? Does that help a little bit, Goldstein?
Very slightly, but
okay.
I'll listen.
Good. We'll trudge through this. We'll get there. Let's see, one more, and then I have to continue. Pierre-Antoine, go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I do agree with Goldstein, and yeah, I I agree with you in terms of Rebecca, there's women in the Old Testament in the Bible where women have say, there definitely, I think there's a different power dynamic between the men and the woman in the Old Testament and the men and the women in the New Testament, because in Judges, there's women who become judges. There are women who become very important to the leadership role or in terms of aiding men where they're recognized for it. But in the New Testament, I did a little research on it, but if I'm wrong, please correct me. But in the New Testament, things kind of shift towards that unhealthy, that toxic patriarchy, as you say, where women are kind of shunned from leadership positions, or they're looked down upon, which tends to be a lot of patriarchies in different societies, which is why the whole idea of patriarchy kind of bothers me, because I've never, studying history, I'd never learned or never saw a legitimate normal or what patriarchy is supposed to stand for, in a sense.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, wait. Hold on, please. We can't all talk all the time. No. I'm sorry. I need to interrupt you, Staich, because I do need to continue, right? And there is room for discussion, but not the whole time. So we'll get there. So yes. Yeah. Pierre-Antoine, you make an excellent point that the role of the woman, the patriarchal context in the Hebrew Bible is very different from the patriarchal context in the New Testament. And this is because of the Greek influence in the New Testament. And we will learn when we do Genesis 1 and 2, how deeply misogynistic Greek philosophy was at the time and how it has influenced the church fathers and the apostles, Paul especially, right? So you're right, I appreciate the distinction. So let me press on, and then maybe we'll have some time for question, but I need to finish my argument because if you stop me in the middle, you're not going to finish I'm not going to be able to say the whole thing. So now, I think we can agree that there is some good intention in protecting the relationship, in protecting the courtship, protecting the woman to a certain degree and so forth. Now, here's where even benevolent patriarchy is problematic, right? So the patriarchy I just described, by the way, is the patriarchy that we find in the Hebrew Bible, right? You have, this is a patriarchy which is not dominating. The woman has a say. She can disagree, she can influence, right? Let me make sure I make this clear, right? Sarah was able to influence Abraham's decision, right? With regards to Hagar. Of course, Hagar took the hit. This is another story. And then Rebecca had a choice who she was going to marry, right? And then you have these women who defy the patriarchal society, like Deborah, who was a military leader, and so forth, right? So you have already in the Hebrew context, the patriarchy is pretty open, right? There is, the woman's agency exists, unlike some societies, right? But now, here are the issues even with this type of patriarchy, and this is why wisdom literature will step in, right? So the main reason, and then I'll go into the details, right? The main reason is that the rules can become too rigid. And when they become too rigid, and make sure you write this down, they defeat their purpose, right? Let me write this down, right? Rules that become too rigid defeat their purpose. In other words, I'll explain, right? If the rules which are meant to promote love, right, to promote loving relationships, when they become too rigid, actually they promote the opposite. They promote distrust, oppression, and xenophobia, right? So this is where patriarchy can, this is one of the pitfalls. When its rules become too rigid, you end up in a context of oppression and of distrust, which is exactly the opposite what the rules are trying to do. The rules are trying to foster loving relationships. I'm going to give an example in a second, Pierre-Antoine, right? So the rules are meant to foster and protect relationships. When they become too rigid, what I'm saying is that they foster the opposite. I will give you examples in the four aspects. Let's look at courtship, right? This is number one, courtship. So we know the rules in the Hebrew Bible, right? The woman is never constrained to love someone she doesn't love or to marry someone she doesn't love, but there are still some rules as to whom she can date, right? And you find this all over the world, right? You are allowed to say no to this guy, but if you fall in love with the wrong guy, right, it's over. You're not allowed, right? There are certain courtships which are forbidden, right? So even though the woman has the freedom to say no to a potential partner, there are some relationships that she might fall into that will be straight up, no, you can't do this, right? For example, if it's another religion or if it's another culture. We see this right now in Queens, right? Right now in Queens, some of you are going through this, right? So what happens then? Now you have the rule fostering unloving behavior instead of loving behavior, right? Because now I love you, but you're from a different religion, and therefore I have to stop loving you. And now we are entering a narrow space rather than a broad space, right? We are, the love in a way becomes constrained. Are you following this first example? How in a way the rules of courtship, which are supposed to make the relationship good, actually can promote distrust and unloving behavior. Are you following me on this? Put your hand on the screen if you're seeing what I say. Okay, this one is the easy one. Now, it's gonna get worse and worse as I progress. Rules of virginity. So yes, of course, virginity it is important, right? This is this notion that protecting the monogamy of the relationship, making sure that the partners know only each other, right? There's something absolutely beautiful in that, right? You want to make sure that there is no outsider going to enter the relationship, either before or after, right? This is beautiful ideal. The problem is when it becomes too strict, the people who do not fall into this category are immediately demonized, immediately rated as impure. A woman who has, you know, given up her virginity is seen as, I mean, I don't know what kind of sex education you had, but me, when I was taught, it was like, oh, she's now a dirty shirt, or she's chewed gum, or she's tainted wine. I have all the vocabulary, right? So this attitude, right, towards the person who comes in the relationship without their virginity is an attitude which is now unloving. We have entered the unloving state. The rule has become too rigid, right? The same notion with premarital sex, right? Absolutely, it is a very high ideal to say that, you know, sex belongs in marriage when you both are very committed to each other. Absolutely excellent advice, right? But then what do you do when people, right, are not entering into this mode of doing things? Immediately they are in sin, they are corrupt, they are, right, there is this type of accent, right, on you have to be pure, is implying that you can become impure, right? Now I'm reminding here always of the words of Jesus, right? It is never something that enters you that can make you impure. It is what comes out of you. So if we start to talk about purity, are we not then implying impurity, right? And this is problematic, right? Is somebody who has loved now automatically impure? I have a problem with that language, right? Hold on, Stage. I'm getting there. I will leave you all the time to question as soon as I'm done with my... So, right, jot down your questions, right? I want to hear them. Now, everybody follow what I'm saying here. This notion of pure, impure is problematic. I get it. I get the advice. I get the wisdom, all right, of protecting one's sexuality for, you know, for marriage, for, you know, but at the same time, the language of pure, impure is deeply problematic. There has to be another way to do this, right? This is how I would react to it. The third one, modesty. So here again, right, the woman is told, dress a certain way, don't wear this, don't wear that, right? No jewelry, no this, no that, depending on what community you're in. Again, right, I get it. One of my favorite authors actually is a woman who has written on the Jewish concept of modesty, right? She's Gila Manolson, right? Very conservative writer, but makes a beautiful point why it's important, right? So I totally get it, right? That you want to, you know, kind of be more discreet. Modesty in a way allows your inner life to shine versus and so forth. At the same time, right? This covering up of women's sensuality, this demonization of it, the fact that the woman raised in this context is not allowed to explore it and develop it and flourish in her body because her body is constantly hidden. There's a problem with this, right? The woman is not allowed to really fully blossom in her feminine body because she's constantly told, hide it, right? So again, right, problem. And finally, of course, marriage, right? Which again, absolutely important, right, to protect the sanctity of marriage, but then this idea of no divorce, right, in many patriarchal societies, which means that some women remain trapped in abusive marriages, right? The fixed roles within the marriage can be problematic for a woman's self-development, right? So this is all the ways, right, that patriarchy starts out good, at least the way I defined it, right, and can become can foster unloving behavior, at least when it comes to the woman, right? Okay, now I'm ready for your questions. Stajic, you're first, you're bubbling.
No, I'm not not bubbling as much. I'm just, there's a lot of things that you mentioned. One of the things you're talking about, somebody said something about females in courtship, females in Hebrew text versus versus the Greek text. Number one, in Hebrew text, you mentioned Abraham. Isaac was as well a virgin, just as Rebecca was. Abraham was the one who said to Isaac, who said to his servant to go to a land of one of his relatives to marry. This was not Isaac's decision. That's one thing that right there is when it comes to that courtship in Hebrew scriptures, the firstborn son in that case did not have any say at all. Either just as just as Rebecca was second virginity, oh damn, I lost the point on that. Oh damn. Right. That's right. In Greek scriptures, you were talking about also courtship. That somebody said that you pointed out Paul. Paul actually says that husbands should love their wives just as they love themselves, just like because Jesus loved them, as Jesus loved us. Let me actually have a Bible right here.
I got it. Husbands, I know the text. Continue.
Right, loving your wives just as Christ loved us and the congregation. Yeah. So that's the Hebrew. Forgive me, Greek. That's by Paul, and
excellent. Let me add to what you're saying, right? This is an excellent response to Pierre-Antoine, right? Paul often seems to be misogynistic, but at the same time, he's subtly subverting the Greek culture, right? So you bring out an excellent point, Stajich, when you say this, that actually Paul is actually subverting the Greek culture when he says wives. So he begins with the Greek culture. He says, wives, submit to your husband. That's very Greek. But then a couple verses later, he says, and the husband should love his wife, right? Which is not Greek at all. Let me finish, Stajich. Right? This is not Greek at all, right? This notion that the husband needs to reciprocate. So you see, Pierre-Antoine, how he starts out Greek because he's trying to be in the context, and then he subverts it, right? So this is one of the ways. Stajich, you need to let me finish speaking before you speak. Thank you. Right, so this is one of the powerful ways that even in the New Testament, right, you have a subversion of patriarchy.
No, I got a real quick
Stajich, you need to be more disciplined, Stajich. We cannot have you talking the whole time, Stajich. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you and go to the next question. Next, let's see. Everybody can have a chance to speak, but not the whole time. Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, so maybe not as controversial, but you mentioned on the point of modesty that there is discourse in, Hebrew culture, and that can be seen throughout many of the biblical texts that we are going to be reading about how there seems to be a sort of duality between the inner life and the outer life, and that patriarchy in some way has rules that govern that. I was wondering if maybe at any point in this class, if we'd maybe be able to discuss like the ethical implications of having the ethical implications of the Greek reading of this sort of inner and outer life. The reason why is because, Spinoza, who was a very Jewish thinker, he wasn't a Jew, but he was a very Jewish thinker. In part 3 of his ethics, claims that the first thing that constitutes the essence of the mind is simply the idea of a body that actually exists. He sort of makes the claim that there is no distinction between the outer and the inner life. And I mean, is there anything that you think that the texts we are going to read will speak to that?
Yeah, in the Hebrew context, just briefly to answer your question, everything is outer, right? The inner life is entirely expressed by your behavior, right? So the actions are what are expressing the inner life, right? There's no inner life first and then actions. Through your actions, you become the inner life, right? We'll talk about this later. But good, excellent observation. Let's have one more before I continue. Let's see. Kestenbaum, go ahead.
I just want to touch upon a point that you briefly mentioned about marriage. It's interesting because I do understand why women's liberation movements would see marriage as sort of institutionalized slavery, which is a pretty extreme term, but I get where that idea comes from. But at least from an Old Testament Hebrew perspective, especially when you look at the oral law and the Talmud, there's a lot of emphasis on the woman entering marriage, not necessarily because it's owning into a patriarchal system, but actually quite the opposite. In order for her to be economically, financially liberated, in order for her to be a safe woman growing up in a time period where an unmarried woman was, of course, being taken advantage of. So the institution of marriage from that perspective actually ensures her freedom. And I think that's why the Talmud puts so many legal obligations on the father, and in some cases even on the brother, to make sure that their daughter or sister is married in order to ensure her freedom and her enjoyment in life.
Yeah, and I would add on the husband, right? The husband is given certain duties in the context of the Jewish marriage. So you're giving a perfect example of benevolent patriarchy, right? Which is in a way trying to liberate the woman, right? Through this kind of protective structure, right? Again, we're gonna still move away from that, right? But you're giving Kestenbaum an excellent example of how patriarchy is not necessarily malevolent, right? There are some good elements to it, right? So let me go further. I'm going to try and trudge through nevertheless, inch by inch. So we will see in this class why wisdom literature chooses to step in and move away from patriarchy, right? We can see already some of the issues. And what we're going to see in the wisdom literature, right, is not so much an overturning of patriarchy as a loosening of the patriarchal grip, right? We're going, so wisdom, let me write this down, right? Wisdom literature is really intentionally, right, trying to loosen the grip of patriarchy, trying to sometimes even subvert it, right? So why? And we have to understand why, right? I really want to go over this why, because some people might be thinking patriarchy is doing a good job, right? Well, we saw there's some issues with it, right? With regards to the woman, but there's a deeper reason, right? Why the wisdom literature chooses to expand some of these fixtures of patriarchy. The main reason has to do with the fact that life cannot flow in a structure that is too rigid. It does need some structure, but when it becomes too rigid, life itself cannot flow, right? And I would add, love cannot flow, and faith cannot flow, and spirit cannot flow, right? If the structure becomes too rigid, there is the love is not able to flow freely. There is we're going to learn about a Hebrew concept of love, which is chesed, which means simply there are many ways to define it, but this is unconditional love, undeserved love. This is not the love of someone who is following the rules. This is love which gushes out no matter what is going on the other side, right? So this type of love, right, chesed, can become stunted when the patriarchy becomes too rigid. In other words, when, for example, when marriage is all about, I give you this if you give me that, right? I'll commit if you commit. I'll love you if you love me. I'll stay if you'll change, right? If love becomes all if you, then I, if you, then I, which is basically the basis of the marriage contract, right? It's a contract. If you do this, then I'll do this. If you do this, then I'll do this. If you do this, then I'll do this, right? If love is just a business transaction, it loses its character of free-flowing, unlimited, unconditional flow. Are you following this, right? In other words, when everything is scripted, there is no more room for this kind of love. There's no more room for faith, right? If everything is scripted, there's no room for life itself to pulse, and there's no room especially for spirit, right? Everything becomes kind of scripted and in little categories, right? This is why wisdom literature steps in intentionally and explodes the structures of patriarchy in order to release. Okay, not all, I mean, if we just do that, right, it's a completely different worldview, right, that we're going to enter with wisdom literature. The goal is to release life, is to release us from constraints that we have made become too narrow, too restrictive, and we're not breathing anymore. It's like patriarchy can become like a corset, here, just to use a nice feminist image. Everybody knows what a corset is? I'm French, so we know. Who know? Everybody put your hand on the screen if you know what a corset is. If not, look it up. It's what women used to wear to make ourselves look beautiful. And you barely could breathe, you know, just shallow breaths. Right? Some of you who are wearing one, you know what I'm talking about, right? So if the corset is too tight, if it's a little bit tight, it's good. You know, it makes everything elegant and, you know, you look good, right? For those women who wear them, you know what I'm talking about. But if it's too tight, you're going to die. This is the issue. Wisdom literature is there to ensure that patriarchy doesn't get too tight, so that life can flow again and love can flow again. Are you following my argument? Am I making sense? You can put your hand in the screen if you're seeing what I mean. Okay, so that's the reason, right? Okay, King, you had a question for a while. Go ahead.
My question was about if everything was flipped, the problems would still persist, right? If we lived in a matriarchal society, either the same problems would persist or unique problems would arise, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So therefore, the roots of the problem would be like you're saying, is being too strict.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess I don't know why I still have my hand up. But my new question is, what is the point to this kind of freedom? It's hard to explain. So I think I'll come back, but I'm just not. I don't know what you mean when you say this kind of life energy.
Yes, okay, we'll get there when we study, right? Especially when we get to the 3 Hebrew goddesses, right? Ruth, Esther, Song of Songs. These are where we will see the biggest explosion of the patriarchal structures with regards to gender relations, and you will begin to see what is flowing there now that we've loosened up a bit, right? So yeah, you will see it throughout. I'm just introducing, right? As we go through, you will begin to see what is opened up to us when we start to push back on the patriarchal structures, right? Again, patriarchal structures have served an excellent purpose, but there is sometimes a moment to push back in order to recover this life of the spirit that we're going to be discovering throughout the semester. So I'm already giving you a hint where we're going, right? The life by the spirit is different than the life by the book, right? And we're going to talk about that throughout the class. Okay, I must interrupt the questions and go briefly now into the wisdom literature and explain a little bit the genre, right? What is wisdom literature? Because that's what we're going to be doing. What is the atmosphere of these books? What is, in order to really enter it with the right mindset, right? So, first of all, wisdom literature is part of the 3rd classification of the books of the Bible called the writings. You have the writings, you have the 5 books of Moses, and you have the prophets, right? Wisdom literature is found in the writings section. And typically classified there, you have Proverbs, Song of Songs, Job, Ecclesiastes. So a lot of the books we're doing are there, right? Etc. And I'm going to add, right, Genesis, and I'll explain why, obviously, and the Gospel of John. And of course, the three goddesses, as I've called them, right? Ruth, Esther, Song of Songs, right? And Song of Songs already is typically classified as wisdom literature. So I'm going to add to this family of books, and I'm going to each time argue why I think Genesis, Ruth, Esther should be part of the wisdom literature, right? So these are the books. Now, what's interesting about these books is that they're really rarely talked about, right? When you go into a church or a synagogue, you mostly hear about the New Testament or about the 5 books of Moses or the prophets, but very rarely will you hear about these books. And there are reasons for that. Main reason is these books are problematic. And we'll see why in a second, right? They're problematic, they're complex, they're difficult, and the clergy prefers to shy away from them. So here are the 3 main reasons, I believe, why wisdom literature has been set aside for so long, right? Number 1, wisdom literature is human-centered. Number 2, wisdom literature is universal. And number 3, wisdom literature is subversive. If you understand these 3 points, you're ready to enter this class, right? So let's begin with human-centered. Okay, number 1, human-centered. Okay, when you look at the rest of the Bible in general, who is doing most of the speaking? When you look at the 5 books of Moses, when you look at the prophets, who is doing most of the speaking? King, go ahead.
It's somebody who's written. It's not God. It's a man. It's a human.
So obviously the narrator is a man, but who is speaking in the text? Yes, Taich.
I'm sorry. The obvious answer, it's God. I don't think
Okay,
humans are
absolutely.
speaking
Yes.
at all in the Bible.
Absolutely. In the 5 books of Moses and the prophets, most of the speaking is done by God, right? Of course, the narrator is a human being, but the one speaking in the text, right, is God. In fact, you open the Bible first page, what do you see? You see the creation story, and you see God opens up the whole show with 7 words, right? And each time he's speaking, some of the world comes into being. Later, God turns to the patriarchs and he's now speaking to them. And so you have and God spoke to Abraham, God spoke to Isaac, God spoke to Jacob. Later in the book of Exodus, God speaks his law and his commandments through Moses. And then in the prophets, likewise, right? The prophet is the one speaking, but he always begins his speech by saying, thus says the Lord, thus says the Lord, thus says the Lord. Okay, so God is really doing most of the speaking. Now, when you go to the wisdom literature, like Proverbs, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, who now is doing most of the speaking, do you think, or do you see? Who is doing now most of the speaking? Who is taking center stage? Granik.
People are talking more.
Absolutely. Right?
I have a question on it though.
Go ahead.
So wouldn't Psalms kind of be included in that also?
Yeah. It should. It really, I think it is, in fact.
Sorry.
Chat for me, right? I think it is, but
Sorry.
very fast for me. If it isn't, it should be. I'm going to change the canon right now. Yeah, absolutely. Psalms should be there because it's a human being, right? Speaking out of the depths of his soul. There's nothing more wisdom literature than that. Good. Human beings now, and this is the first point, are taking center stage. They are the ones doing most of the speaking. And God, in a way, falls silent. He retreats backstage, right? And so you have this first feature, right, of wisdom literature. Second feature has to do with the universal character of the books, right? This is the most interesting part for me, right? When you're looking at the wisdom books, right, what you're seeing is that the target audience seems to aim way beyond the borders of Israel, right? The target audience seems to be actually more of a secular audience than a religious audience, right? So you have this, and I'm going to argue for this in 2 ways, right? 3 ways, actually. There are 3 reasons why I'm saying that the target audience, the audience for whom these texts were intended, are not so much the Hebrews than what we call the nations or the Goyim, right? This is the target audience. 3 arguments from thematic material, arguments from the characters, and arguments from the authorship. Let me look at that briefly. First of all, thematic material. What do these books talk about? Do they talk about how to keep the law? Do they talk about how to worship? Do they talk about the attributes of God? What are these books mostly about? Alim, go ahead.
They talk about things that you can like apply to like a lot of religions, and like it's like very like universal problems, like questioning God and things like that.
Okay, absolutely, right? The theme of these books are not religious theme, right? The preoccupation of these books is not religion or even God, right? These books are focused on how to live life, right? These books will talk about how to face suffering, right? How to face death, how to love, how to enjoy life, how to find pleasure, how to doubt, right? So you have actually the themes of these books, actually universal themes, right? The themes of these books have a broader appeal than just a religious audience. Everybody wants to know how to face death, how to suffer gracefully, how to love, right? The themes themselves are universal, right? Now, when you get to the characters, you will notice systematically how you have an infiltration of non-Jewish characters in these texts, right? There's a whole crowd of non-Hebrews sitting there and teaching. First example, the Song of Songs. The woman, right, describes herself as dark-skinned. What is she? Is she just tanned from the summer sun, or is she actually coming from a region in Africa, right? There seems to be some racial difference here, right? So many commentators say that that woman is actually an African woman, right? Who is speaking here in the middle, right? So then you go to the character, for example, of in the book of Proverbs is the best one. When you go to the last few Proverbs, right, you're going to have the last few Proverbs are actually not authored by King Solomon. Does anybody know who authored these last few Proverbs? Let's see. Said, do you know?
I'm sorry, I got a question. Song of Songs?
No, I'm sorry. No, not yet the questions. Just answer quickly what I'm saying, because I need to finish and then I'll have some time for questions. So if you don't know, that's okay. Pierre-Antoine, do you know?
I think it's King Agur or something like that.
Yes, you know your text very well, Pierre-Antoine. It's a pleasure, right? This is a king. Now, where is this king from? Do you know?
I don't know, but I know he spoke of his mother's teachings in, like, I think Proverbs 30.
Yeah.
But I don't know where he's from. Honestly, I really don't.
This king is one of the Canaanite kings surrounding the nation of Israel. And if you recall, the Canaanites have an extremely bad reputation in the Hebrew context, right? I'm going to write down their name here, right? The Canaanites were the nation surrounding the Hebrews, which are described in the Hebrew text as being pagans, corrupt, disgusting, right? They have horrible, rituals and worship practices, right? They need to be wiped out. They are an abomination. And yet this abomination, right, finds its way in the book of Proverbs. This is spectacular, right? The way that the book of Proverbs have opened up a space for a Canaanite king to write down some proverbs that he got no less from his mother, right? So this is interesting. Then you go to the book of Ecclesiastes, where you have a kind of hybrid character who is speaking both Hebrew and Egyptian, right? If you read the book of Ecclesiastes, as we will study it, there is such an infiltration of Egyptian language, Egyptian concepts, Egyptian worldview, that this book can be seen really as written by a person who belonged to both worlds, right? And we'll see how that works. So you can see how already the characters, right, there's a whole crowd of non-Hebrews sitting there teaching, not just listening and learning, they're teaching, right? And then of course you have, this covers the protagonist and the authors, right? So now you can, so just to ask you a question, just really briefly, why do you think that in the wisdom literature, such a welcoming stance has been adopted towards foreigners? Why do we have all these non-Hebrews sitting there teaching us in the Bible, no less? Why do you think this is the case? Let's see, Pierre-Antoine and then Williams.
I think, well, why did I just forget the question? Like, I had the answer. What is the question? I'm so sorry. I had it and then
Why so many people from the outside teaching us in the Bible?
Oh, well, because at least for the New Testament, like, you know how Jesus was like ministering and everything, he pretty much went all around the world. I think, I don't remember what book, but I think there was a time where like Jesus like met up with an Ethiopian woman. I forgot exactly the reason, but I remember like she said to him that she believes in like Jesus, and like seeing how much his teachings were just spread around because he was always moving and mobilizing throughout different regions of the world, constantly having to hide anyway because like people are always trying to like kill him, but like he did his teachings universally like everywhere.
Yeah, so this, you bring up an interesting point that Jesus himself, in my view, belongs to wisdom literature because of this universal character of his teachings, right? We don't see him as a philosopher, but we should, right? Let's see, there was a couple more. I see, one more. Yeah, Olivera, go ahead.
I think it will be to give a more holistic experience, because if we all agree, for the sake of the argument, that the Bible is the word of God, God didn't make only Jewish people, he made a variety of people, and then it's like a truth to whatever God, the creation, that everybody has a chance to speak, even though maybe not all voices should be considered.
Excellent, right? You bring up a really important point, is that the wisdom literature seems to be pointing us not to the God of the Hebrews, but to the God of humanity, right? And so everyone needs to be there at the table speaking so we can have a complete perspective, right? If the writers of wisdom literature were keenly aware that they could not reach wisdom on their own from their Hebraic perspective. It was not enough to be a Hebrew to know God, to really know the God of the universe. Yeah, you can know the God of the Jews, but to know the God of the universe, you need to be talking to others, right? And so this is showing us how this is quite extraordinary, right? Given the bad reputation the Bible has gotten now, to realize that the Bible itself actually quite inclusive, right? Realizes, at least in those texts, right, that we need each other to really have a complete vision of the truth of who God is, at least the God of the universe, right? Excellent. Now moving to the last one, which is the subversive. This is the worst one. This is the part where a lot of us will stumble, right? These books systematically, when you read them from cover to cover, you start to see a common denominator. And that common denominator is that they're going intentionally against the grain of the rest of the Hebrew Bible. They're intentionally subverting the teachings of the rest of the Hebrew Bible. I'll give you some examples, and we'll see them in depth, of course, when we study the text. But when you look, for example, at the Song of Songs, we'll see that the woman there, who is not a Hebrew, in my opinion, in my learned opinion, right? The woman there is breaking every single rule of courtship that we know. All of them, from the beginning to the end. She's breaking the rules of courtship, every single one of them. And yet, the book finds itself in the heart of the Hebrew Bible, right? Why is that? We're going to find out, right? But already you have here a deeply subversive view on relationships and on love with regards to the surrounding patriarchal views, right? When you get to the book of Proverbs, right? You have a definition of wisdom, which goes against everything we know from the rest of the Hebrew Bible. If you know the Hebrew Bible, where does wisdom normally come from? When you read the Bible in general, who has the monopoly on wisdom? Stage.
Well, it's of course Solomon. He was the wisest man alive before Jesus.
In the rest of the Bible, not in the Solomon's writings. Where does wisdom come from according to the Bible in general?
God.
Okay, excellent, right? Absolutely. Right? Wisdom typically is coming from God, which is why if you follow God's rules and commandments, you're going to have a good life because these rules are wise. They're coming from God, the source of wisdom. Now you get to the book of Proverbs, you don't even have God there. You have a father teaching a son. Basically, what the book is saying is that wisdom can also be found in experience. Yeah, wisdom can come from God, but also, if you've lived long enough, you're going to know what to do, right? So in a way, it bypasses the religious duty to ask God for wisdom and just says, just get some experience and you'll be wise, right? Very subversive move, right? The book of Ecclesiastes, we're going to see, is a complete subversion of, the whole notion of good and evil, right and wrong. Morality is completely dissolved in the book of Ecclesiastes in order to make room for something else. We're going to see what that is, right? Solomon destroys in order to open up a different field of consciousness, right? He destroys the notion, the dualities, right, wrong, good, evil. He's trying to dissolve them to get somewhere else. So we're going to see where that is, right? He's doing something very Nietzschean, right? Beyond good and evil. What exists beyond good and evil? We're going to find out, right? So you can see already, right, how where we're headed is not easy, right? These books, especially if we come from a religious background, we are going to constantly stumble. So my invitation to you is, if you come from a religious background, I want you to leave it at the door of the classroom just for 1 hour. And then you can go back and put it back on. It's okay, right? But in order to really relish these texts, you have to adopt a secular, open mindset, because that's the spirit in which the books were written, right? These books were not written for religious mindset. They were written for a secular, universal, sometimes atheistic mindset. The way, I'm just giving you an advice. The best way you can enjoy these books is if you momentarily suspend all of that you have learned in religious school. Can I ask you to do that just for 1 hour? Then you can put it back on, it's okay. Can I ask you to do that? Momentarily, you suspend everything you learned in religious school and you keep an open mind. You will suffer less. Can you do that? Put your hand in the screen if you're ready. Okay, see if you're.
We can try, but it's not always so possible.
I know. I'm asking for something very hard. Just for 1 hour, right? Just for 1 hour. Then you put it back on. I'm fine with that, right? Just for 1 hour, put it away. Just so you can really enjoy the ride, right? This is like, how do I compare this to? Yeah, like when you go to a restaurant, right? Try not to eat before you go, right? Does that make sense, Goldstein? If you eat before you go, you're not going to enjoy it, right? So keep it, empty your stomachs.
I said we could definitely try it, but it's just not always so possible when you grew up with that background to read the same text and not keep them in perspective.
No, absolutely.
But yeah.
Thank you for trying, Goldstein. Thank you for trying. Yeah, it's not easy, but the idea is, you know, we want to enter these texts with a kind of without the baggage, so we can genuinely read them, right? I'm doing this for the sake of the text, Goldstein. You see what I mean? If we come in with too much baggage, we might miss what the text is actually saying, right? And again, we will be in the class interpreting from many different perspectives. Obviously, I'm not going to impose a perspective because I will open it up to your perspective. So you can then pick and choose, right? You're free to think as you want. You're absolutely free to think as you want, but I want you to be able to receive, right? And then you make your own conclusions. It's fine. Good. Okay. Now let me just have, yeah. Then I'll get your questions. Keep your questions. I'm ready for them. But I want to just conclude on this. This section with regards to these 3 points, right? So you can see how these books are problematic, difficult, complex, right? And the question is, right, that arises is how did these books nevertheless stay in the biblical text, right? What were the rabbis thinking, right, who compiled the Bible? What were they thinking by keeping these books there? Why are they there, right? I want to ask you this question. Why do you think these books are so important? Another way to ask the question is to ask you, what would happen if these books were not there? What kind of spirituality would we have if these books were not there? What do you think? Pierre-Antoine, go ahead, and then Branik.
I think these books are like still in the, at least Hebrew Bible, because like you said, like there's a universal aspect of it. Like there's definitely like important, valuable like teachings and like understanding of what's being said in these different texts. So it's like, why would you just throw something out just because it kind of not contradicts but challenges what's been said already, when you could just take what is needed from the text? It's not saying God's not real or like whatever, but it's saying like you said, how to deal with suffering gracefully instead of looking miserable, or like how to deal with death and all these different aspects. So yeah.
And you mentioned the notion of challenge. Why do you think it's important that these texts challenge the dominant tradition?
I'm not really sure. Like from a philosophical point of view, like challenge is something that everyone should face. Like it builds character, but like in a text, I'm not really sure why you would want something challenging, except for like maybe to get an understanding from it. But yeah, I'm not really sure.
All right. Branik, you want to add?
Sure, yeah. So I guess it kind of maintains that tension that we were talking about like before, about sort of like on the one hand you sort of there's a benefit, I guess, to having sort of rules and like a certain mode of doing things. But on the other hand, you know, you, like we were talking about, you kind of need a space to express yourself and you know, be you know, kind of a human, I guess. So it's sort of this tension that I guess the biblical canon and the canonizers are trying to sort of balance and maintain.
Excellent. And you remind me of a quote by Abraham Heschel, right, who was a Jewish philosopher from New York, actually, where he says the secret, right, is to be both human and holy, right? That's for him the secret of a humanity, of a life well lived, is the ability to keep the humanity and the holiness together. So the biblical text is doing this. You have the holy texts, right? You have the law, you have the rituals, but then you have this moment of humanity, right? So that's that, just to go along with what you were saying. Anybody else want to talk about why these texts are fundamental? Alim, go ahead. And then Kestenbaum.
So I kind of wanted to make a reference. I'm not really sure if this makes sense, but to like Aristotle's golden mean, like there has to be like a balance between like extreme conservatism and then like being like super liberal, to have like this moral balance between things. And then also to go back to Pierre Antoine's comment about like why would we want to challenge like the status quo. Oh my god, I'm like stuttering, sorry. It's like our constitution, how we like promote like protest and like challenging our own like ideals that we already wrote, like the amendments and all that. Like to improve on something, you need to criticize it. So I guess that's why we want to criticize like the Holy Bible, so it can be more perfected.
I really like the way you put it, the comparison with the Constitution. Right, we have a constitution set in stone, and then we have amendments. Because if we leave the constitution set in stone, our country will go to hell straight, no detours, right? So the notion, the understanding that as we move forward in time, we need to nuance, we need to broaden, we need to make things more flexible in order for the constitution to still fulfill its purpose, right? Is very similar here. Right, the wisdom literature are the amendments, right, you could say. Let me add one more thing. Sorry, Kestenbaum, briefly, go ahead, and then I'll conclude on that section. Go ahead, Kestenbaum.
Briefly, I think rather than looking at the wisdom literature as a contradiction to the classic biblical narrative, I think they actually enhance one another, and they very much complement each other. So a contemporary of Abraham Heschel was an influential rabbi named Joseph Soloveitchik, and he wrote an important book within American Orthodox life still today called Halachic Man, halacha referring to the Hebrew word for Jewish law. And he made a lot of arguments, one of them being that to be a God-believing and Bible-observant man or Jew, I mean, he used the term Jew, but it's applied universally, one can't just be in the ivory tower of biblical elitism, but they also put themselves out in this world. And so wisdom literature is a complement, or rather a practice that puts it more in focus as to how one can live both a religious life, but also a very practical life. So rather than it contradicting each other, I actually think you can't really have one without the other.
Excellent. I'll bring it back to Alim, who mentioned Aristotle. Aristotle talks about ethics he compares it to a ray of light that goes through water, right? You have the light very pure. When it comes to water, it, how do you call it? Refracts? Is that the right term? Yeah, it refracts. It switches, right? Why? Because reality needs you. You need, when you enter reality with the ideals, some refraction is needed, some modulation is needed for it to become applied, right? In Christian terms, you could say that the salt has to come out of the salt shaker before it can really purify or preserve the meat, right? You can't, Jesus mentions we should be like salt, right? But if the salt remains rigidly contained in the salt shaker, it will never enter the world, right? So same idea, this notion that wisdom literature is there to teach us how to take the ideals, which are pure and golden and ethereal and beautiful, and apply them. And when we apply them, sometimes we have to nuance and modulate and cut here and twist here, right? Perhaps that is what is going on here with wisdom literature. The main reason, or one of the reasons I will add to everything you said, has to do with the notion of covenant religion. Right? The Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew spirituality, differs from the surrounding spiritualities in this sense. In the surrounding religions of Israel, God was a kind of authority figure and everybody had to obey him. End of story, no discussion, right? The God of the Hebrews is very different. He is looking for a partnership, not for a slaves. He's not looking for slaves or submitted servants. He's looking for partners or spouses. Sometimes he even uses the language of marriage, right? Now, what is the sign of an unhealthy marriage? What do you think? What is the sign? Sosa, go ahead.
My mic is working this time.
Yay.
So when it comes to like an unhealthy marriage, I think one big thing is like, well, if love is supposed to be like a scale, let's say an unhealthy marriage is like 100 and the other side is just 0. Like one partner has no ability to make any choices, speak on anything on like their behalf. Like, you know, for instance, like, you know, if your partner is ordering for you at a restaurant, like they're the one that are in charge pretty much.
I do that.
Yeah.
So thank you for pointing that out.
You're welcome.
Okay, yes, absolutely. When one partner has taken over, when one partner has all of the authority, decides everything, chooses everything, talks all the time, monopolizes the decision-making process and the discussion. Here we have, right, in the context of the biblical literature, we have the attempt at a healthy balance between what God says and how human beings respond, right? And so the wisdom literature is really there to create a space for us to respond to God. And we don't have to respond all meekly and nicely. Some of these responses are raw, unfiltered, they are frustrated, they are angry, right? You have a lot cynical, disruptive, right? So, but it's necessary to create that space. Otherwise, you don't have an authentic relationship, right? And I often tell this story, just to close this section, that is found in the Talmud, to illustrate a little bit the mentality of the wisdom literature. And I know half of you have heard this story already, so I apologize, but this is the story of a group of rabbis that got together and decided to do a reading group where they would study the Bible together. And so they start, you know, Genesis, and they go up and they get to the story of Noah. And when they get to the story of Noah, they get really depressed and annoyed. And they start to really loathe Noah. And they're like, who is this guy? He's such a loser. We hate him. In fact, they hate him so much, they want to stop reading the Bible altogether. They almost give up. And then one of the rabbis says, no, let's continue. Let's give it a chance, right? A few chapters later, they get to the story of Abraham. And they are exploding with joy. They're so happy. This guy is their man. He's the best. They start to drink, right? They pour some vodka for Abraham. They start to drink to Abraham's health. They start a little dance, right? They're so happy. So here's my question to you. Why do you think the rabbis despised Noah yet loved Abraham? What's the difference between Noah and Abraham? And if you've heard the answer before, like Sosa, you cannot answer. And Kestenbaum knows the answer too. Too many of you already been in. Fine, Sosa, go ahead.
Okay, so if I'm correct, the reason why he liked him more was simply because when he was how can I probably explain this? Basically, he questioned God is the reason why he favored him more. Is because instead of just saying like, all right, you do you, like, you know, I'm not going to judge you, you're God. Instead, sorry, what's his name again?
Abraham.
Abraham, yeah. He pretty much questioned God. He's like, wait a minute, no, like, why the hell are you doing this? Like, we, you know, can there be a reason? Like, he's actually questioning someone that's much better, like much greater than him. And that's the reason why he liked him so much, because instead of having a one-sided relationship where it's just whatever God says, you know, it happens, he actually questioned him. You know, he was, you know, fighting back a little bit. There's actually some communication. It's not just a full-on dictatorship.
Okay, you remember well, right? Remember the story, right? God comes to Noah and says, oh, I wanted to let you know that I'm about to destroy the world. And Noah is like, okay. Nothing. He says nothing, right? He goes immediately builds the ark, right? And then, you know, goes through with this thing. So, you know, imagine, right? Imagine God came to you and said, hey, you know, I'm about to destroy the world, but don't worry, I got your back. I'll save you. I mean, hopefully you would have the decency to say, really, are you sure? Is that a good idea? I don't feel comfortable with this somehow, right? No, on the other hand, not a problem, right? He just goes ahead, no discussion, nothing. Now, Abraham is opposite, right? God comes to him and says, I'm about to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham speaks up, right? He disagrees. He has the audacity to disagree with the decree of the Most High. God decreed that these cities would be destroyed. And Abraham begins to bargain for the cities and is in a way almost to the point of swaying God's decision, right? This is the type of spirituality that we have in the wisdom literature. In the wisdom literature, we are not like Noah. We are to become like Abraham, right? Let us give ourselves the space to question, to criticize, to see the problems, to doubt, to be frustrated, right? Because this is actually a necessary step towards maturity. You cannot reach spiritual maturity if you have not gone through a dark night of the soul where you doubt everything, right? And the wisdom literature is there to guide you through that process, right? I tell my students that the wisdom literature is the Bible for those who have gone off the way. There's an expression in Judaism, off the derech, which means, off the way, they've lost, they're the lost sheep, right? The wisdom literature is the Bible for those who are incapable of conforming, right? Who have chosen a different path than the path of religion or patriarchy or, the orderly path. There is a Bible for these also, right? I want to emphasize that in this classroom, there are two kinds of people, right? Half of you are the wise ones in the sense that you are able to receive advice from other people. You are able to respect the wisdom of the ancients and you follow the path that they have trodden for us. But then there's a bunch of you who are incapable of listening to advice, who cannot follow anything, who cannot, who want to find their own path, who want to transgress everything they can get their hands on. What's right? What exists for them? Well, the wisdom literature is actually the Bible that these people can carry along on their journey, because the characters in the wisdom literature books are exactly like that. They're all people who have gone off the path, transgressed, wanted to figure out their own way. Every single one of them is kind of marginalized from the standard view. And so there's a Bible for those who follow the ways of the ancients, and there's also a Bible for those who do not. And the wisdom literature is such a Bible, right? Does that make sense? Everybody follows? Everybody has a Bible now? Put your hand in the screen. Technically, you all should have a Bible now, one or the other. Okay, excellent. Now, it's 4:27. Let me quickly, I want to make some time for a couple questions that some of you still have. So let's do that. And I want to add, right, if any of your questions hasn't been resolved in class, right? Sometimes I go really fast and I need to finish what I had to say, so I skip you. You can totally stay after class and we can talk some more, right? I'm always willing to talk as long as you want, whether after class or at 6 p.m. if I have the next class coming up, right? Usually I don't have it all the time, the next class. So I have some time usually afterwards to continue the discussion, and you can all stay, right? So there's always, right? If any of you had an unanswered question or issue, I want to talk to you either after class or at 6 p.m. But let me get one more question maybe before we close. Anybody? All the questions have gone? No way. Oh, who is this R? R, please put your last name correctly so I know who you are.
Hi, Professor. I'm Daniel Rubinov.
Rubinov? Rubinov.
I had a late registration.
I see that. Yes, stay after class. I'll talk to you. Anybody else? Okay, great. All right, let me see briefly. No, that's it. Okay, so you guys can go. Whoever wants to stay behind, you can. I still have some time. I see a whole bunch of new people came. Hello, Doris. Hi, Mitch. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming, guys.
Bye, Professor. Thank you.
Bye. See you. Kevin, are you still here? Oh, no, Kevin left. Okay.
Professor, do we have any work due by next week?
Yeah, we're gonna have, sorry, I'm taking off the camera so I can charge for the next class. So, yes, sorry, I forgot to mention, you have your first reading assignment. No, wait, no, you don't. I still have to introduce Genesis. So, Yeah, I'm going to be introducing the book of Genesis. So no assignment yet. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much.
We're good.
Have a good weekend.
Bye, Smooth. So who has a question?
Hi, Professor.
Hi, Pierre.
I just I think it was talking about before. I kind of forgot what it was. I think it was talking about the four like rules to the patriarchy and
Oh, you
like,
missed it?
yeah, I didn't miss it. I just had a question in terms of like when a woman is seen as like impure and dirty and all of that, isn't it like kind of a double standards even like in such of an old time within the Old Testament, because it's like how do you determine if a man is a virgin or not, like because like I hope I'm like clear kind of, but like yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Stage mentioned nicely that Isaac also, right? There's a standard for the man too, right? But you're right, it has been emphasized historically on the we've carried most of this responsibility. But the rules in the patriarchal context of the Bible, right, do mention. I mean, when they talk about, it's kind of loose. Those laws about virginity have more to do with rape than with virginity. You know what I mean? When they talk about her being seduced in, solitary place. So the laws actually emphasize more the kind of relationship where she was pushed into it, right? That's the emphasis over just virginity. The Greeks are the ones who came and made that a big deal. Right? And then Christianity followed in the Greek footsteps, right? With this notion.
Yeah.
In the Hebrew Bible, you obviously, because it's patriarchal, you have this idea that both, right? Although we don't know what Isaac did, he was 40, right, when he got married. So we don't know what he did during these 40 years. But in general, there's, the standard is meant to be equal and actually more severe towards the man in the Hebrew Bible. When the woman is seduced, it's the man that is punished, not the woman. So actually the law it goes more strongly towards the man because it's patriarchal, because the man is responsible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I definitely like I get that, because in that notion, like, yeah, the man forced himself upon her, but it's just like even back then they still had that notion of, I don't know, because like I think was it one Jacob's sons where like their sister, I forgot her name.
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
Where she was like raped or something, and then like all her brothers just like destroyed, like set that whole like village or like family like settlement on fire, but then they were punished for it by God. But like, yeah, okay.
Notice though that the biblical text is not in agreement with what Jacob's sons did, right?
Yeah, I know.
So there's the text itself, right, responding to that belief that our sister was defiled, and the text itself seems to be saying, that's not the path.
Yeah.
Hold on, Stage. Wait for your turn. Stage, you have to be more disciplined.
I mean, he could respond to me or something. I don't know. I have fun talking to him. It's interesting. But
you're in his group, so right? No, you're not. Maybe I should put you there, huh? Since you enjoy him so much. Let me get everybody, because I have a next class. It's not like I have all day today. I have a next class.
I know.
I have to go through everybody. See you later, Pierre-Antoine. Who's next?
I just had like a really quick comment. This like went back all the way to your comment about like the Taliban. So like I come from like an Islamic background. So like I felt like it's very important to represent Islam in like, I guess like a right way. I'm not saying that you like, I agree that the Taliban is like a fully like dominant like patriarchal society. But I guess like I felt like it was really important to talk about like the women who like choose to be modest versus the women who do not choose to be modest. Like to elaborate, like I feel like yes, there is, because like there's a male gaze like that is like inevitable. I can't speak today. But there is like a male gaze that we can't prevent. So I feel as though those women who choose to wear modest clothes, they find power in reclaiming their body and the way they're perceived to the world. And I feel as though those women who are like victims of the Taliban, those women do not claim power because they do not choose. And then like my little like Nietzsche brain is saying like, oh, this choice or like choosing their morals is giving them power, and it's like therefore fulfilling their purpose in life. I just wanted to make that comment.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it's one must make the distinction between the women who adhere and choose, therefore there is free will and agency, absolutely, and then the women who find themselves in a situation where they can't escape, right? So I absolutely agree with, and moreover, to add to this, that Islam, right, the way that the female modesty is practiced in Islam in general is very different, actually. Because you do have the faces open, right? It's only the parts of the body. So, but yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, that works. That works for me. I can digest that. King, really quick.
Bye, Professor. I'm gonna go.
Bye. See you, Aline.
Could you, whenever you introduce characters or stuff we haven't read yet, because it's still the introduction to everything, could you just give a little bit of context and like introduction to who these people are? Because although I've been exposed to a lot of these stories and what's happening, I don't know everything, off the top of my head. I can't quote anything like that.
Yeah,
So,
before we do each book, I will introduce for a whole hour the book and the
right, I know. And I also really, really like when you give historical context as well, because I think the epistemology of what's being written and who's writing and doing the talking, I think it's important to understand just a little bit from where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, normally I try to do that a little bit, especially in this class, which is more focused on the biblical narrative. So yeah, I'll try and do that for each text. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Rubinov, can you spell your name for me in the chat?
Hi, Professor. It's Rubinov. I'm gonna type it for you.
All right, Rubinov. I got you. Good. So Rubinov, you want to go to the YouTube lecture from the introduction? It's
Yeah, sure. But I had a quick question. So when I registered for this class, I saw that it was in connection to another class. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
I don't know why, but when I tried to sign up for this class, it said it's in addition to another class.
Oh,
I'll tell you.
75 special studies or something, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh,
How does that work?
You're signed up through that? The special studies?
No, I'm signed up for this one, the 250.
Okay. Good.
So do I have to sign up for that one too, or how does it work?
No, you're good. Yeah, you're good. That's for master's students.
Okay, but this class is fine, right? I could just leave it this way?
You leave everything as it is.
Okay, just wanted to confirm. That was my only question.
Cool.
Because I had a late registration and I started today, which is my first day. What exactly am I missing?
So if you listen to the lecture we did last time, I explained everything that we're going to do in the class. So you go to Blackboard and you go to the section called Recorded Lectures.
Okay.
And there you can listen to last time's class.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you very much.
All right, see you later.
Thank you.
Let's see. One more quick question and then I'll get to stage. But Ali, you have a question? No? Okay. Stage, the floor is yours.
Okay. You compared Solomon's Solomon's writings in Ecclesiastes to Descartes one time. I would actually, first of all, I despise Descartes. I think his teaching, first of all, I do not like that he was an atheist. I hate the idea of solipsism. I think he destroyed everything humans ever believed in. However, Solomon actually brought everything to light. Solomon in Ecclesiastes brought everything, questioned everything. However, he gave correct answers. Whereas with what's it called? With Descartes, what we see is pretty much believe in God the way you want. However you want the God God to be, he is the way it is. And I don't see that in Solomon's writings at all. You know what? I don't, whether I feel insulted or not, that really doesn't matter. I just think that that was a very unfair comparison. I personally see Descartes as I'm not gonna say evil, but on that track, whereas Solomon, given yes he swayed from God's path later on in his life, Solomon actually in Ecclesiastes brought the world way into light. And one of my favorite quotes in there talks about what happens after death. Even what's it called? He even explains, I believe it's Ecclesiastes 2. Pretty much Ecclesiastes 8:9. One of them. Anyway, Solomon pretty much says what the purpose of man is: serve God and observe his commandments, for this is all obligation of man. I think that Solomon actually brought light to the whole world. Whereas Descartes pretty much put a question in all of our heads, and a lot of people's heads are messing over that. A lot of people are thinking that we actually are living in our minds. I think that was a complete destruction of everything that we stand for. Rather, like I said, Solomon brought light into the world, and Descartes brought destruction. I mean, I just thought that was an unfair comparison. I kept.
So let me explain briefly why I compared the two. So what I meant was more in the method, right? Both Descartes and Solomon destroy everything that, deconstruct, right? Everything that is known to be true. And then they open up a different path, right? So in the method, they're similar. In their conclusions, obviously, they're different. But in the method of first destroying in order to liberate a new path, that's in the sense that I see them as similar. Does that make sense, Sage?
Well, look, I believe in Yahweh. I believe in Jehovah. Whether it insults me or not is irrelevant. I just wanted to bring out that.
Okay, good. All right. So, Sage, I need to go to my next class, but
a real quick question. Look, I realize that I might be a little too much for some people. I kind of have a feeling that I'm a little too much for you in the class in general. I don't mean to be insulting or to insult anybody. I just have views that contradict other people's views, because I believe in the Bible very straightforward, and there's a lot of people who swerve and believe in the Bible loosely. A lot of times I would rather argue for the Bible instead of stay aside and listen to things that the Bible is not supporting. I've noticed that there's some people that swerve around, and I'm thinking that's not it. You can I understand you told us to leave our traditions, our religious belief on the side for an hour. I can't do that.
Okay, no. Sage, the issue is not what you're saying. The issue is it's just a question of put yourself in my place for just a second, right? I have a whole class of 20 people. Everybody needs to have a chance to speak, and I need to finish what I have to say. So sometimes when I want to continue and I maybe don't call on you, or maybe when I tell you, okay, let's stop the discussion there, it's not to shut you down particularly, right? It's just that because of the limited time and because there's so many people also want to speak, I have to do that, right? But it's not at all with the content. I think the content is, I think many people will appreciate. Even Pierre-Antoine today was saying she wants to be in your group, right? So the content is perfectly fine. What you're saying actually, in fact, I wish there was more time for, if we had a real class, right, with real people, and I didn't have to worry about time constraints and dealing with this Zoom. the atmosphere would allow for you to speak with more time, right? But because of the constraint, sometimes I need to shut you down, and others, not just you. But it's not because of what you're saying, right? It's because of me trying to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak and finish what I have planned for today. So no, do not feel at all like it has anything to do with what you're saying, right? Again, all perspectives are important. And in fact, sometimes you have some interesting observations, which I think I've used, right? There's a couple of things you said about Paul, which were very important, and then about Isaac. So no, I'm perfectly happy with the contribution. It's just sometimes I will be like, okay, enough, we need to continue. And it's just because of the time constraints. It's not you. Don't take it personally, ever.
Okay, no problem. Because at first I honestly thought, I was like, oh man, I'm really pushing this forward. Maybe I should shut up. But then I'm thinking to myself, how can I shut up when there's a lot of people speaking wrong? And
Stage, it's okay. It's not your role to teach them. I will teach them.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Okay,
yeah, don't take this big responsibility of correcting the students.
Okay.
but don't worry. Speak when you're allowed to speak. You can say what you have to say, but there will be times when I have to move forward. And then of course stay after like this, and whoever stays behind, can listen in. And occasionally you'll say something, that's important, but you cannot say everything, right? There would be no time for you to say everything. It would be just you and me. You see what I mean?
I understand.
So yeah. And so don't worry, do not take it personally when I cut you down, because I'm just thinking I have a million things that are stressing me out.
Okay, I understand. You have other classes. You have right here 20 students, probably have 5 classes, at least 100 different people. I get
no, and it's not so much that as, during the class time, I have to finish, what I have to say, plus allow other people to speak. So that's why sometimes I will ignore you. But no, it's nothing to do with the content. Don't worry at all. And of course, Taich, always stay after class if you have some leftover issues, right? And I might bring them up in the next class, right? Sometimes I will do that based on our discussions. I'll say, oh no, Taich made this point. I thought we should talk about it a little bit. So occasionally I will integrate what you say in the next lecture. So always after. Now I have to go to this next class, but at 6 p.m. usually I'm always also available. So.
Okay. Well, again, look, I just wanted to apologize real quick. I felt like I was a burden. No. And like I said, I just could not stay quiet.
Yes, Stage, that's true, but it wasn't a burden. It's normal. I don't mind at all. No worries, Taich. No need to apologize. It's normal to become excited and passionate when we're talking about the text like this. I appreciate that from you.
Okay, I guess have a nice day, Professor.
Thank you, Taich. See you later.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, guys. Hello. You know what? I have some good news for you today.
So, Professor.
Yes, Hossein.
Professor, just a quick question. What happened to your camera?
Yeah, I have a problem charging. When I'm charging, I can't use my camera.
Next class, okay? Next class.
Busted. Okay. Wow, I wasn't expecting that. That was funny. Okay.
If you need help, the campus gives you one for free.
You're too kind. Yes, I need a new computer. That's basically what I need.
Professor?
Yes, Ali.
Yeah, I think I sat through your last class, but I'm not actually in it.
Yeah, why are you here?
I'm in this class. I thought I have another class at the same time, so yeah.
Oh, Ali, you're in that 104 class? Is that where you are?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
I sat through your last class for no reason.
Well, you're lucky because what we did in the last class is exactly what we're about to do, so you can leave.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay.
It's your lucky day.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
No.
Whoever was in the last class, Williams, also, I believe, Vargas, were you in the last class?
Yes.
Actually, stay for a bit. Oops, he left now. Stay for a bit because I'm going to make a couple announcements. Okay, so I have some good news for this class. Well, hopefully it's good news. I hope you like the news as much as I do. But I don't know if you saw my announcement, but I'm going to make the class into a hybrid. I want to hear a little bit how cool you are with this. If there's too much objection, I won't do that, right? I'll let you choose. But the hybrid class means that some of the lectures will be asynchronous, meaning you don't have to be here. You listen to them on YouTube. How many of you would be happy with having less synchronous meetings and adding a few asynchronous meetings? Put your hand in the screen if you like the idea of having more asynchronous. I'm getting mixed up. More asynchronous. Okay. See, I see some virtual hands. Okay, so a lot of you. Who would like to have? Who doesn't like the idea? Just to see. Anybody wants to come all the time? Already missing me? Oh, Hossein, that's sweet. Or no, you forgot to put your hand down? Okay, so we're going to do this, meaning there will be, so if you go to your syllabus, I changed it, right? If you go to your syllabus, you will see that every time there is an introduction lecture, you will go to our channel, our playlist, and there will be a lecture from a preceding class, same lecture, but from a preceding class, and you just listen to that in your own time. The only time you will come to class is when we do text, right? When we do text, that is when I need you there so we can really struggle over the text together and I can respond to your questions and so forth, right? But this kind of introductory lecture, we don't need to be together. I'm just lecturing, right? There's really not much discussion in those lectures. So for example, which means actually, and this is the good news, we will only meet, let's see, 7 times 2, 14 times in the semester. We will be meeting all together. And the rest of the time, you'll be reading on your own, listening to the lectures on your own, doing the tests, right? So this is why those 14 times show up, right? You need to show up.
Aren't we not supposed to do philosophy alone? Isn't that kind of, isn't that like dangerous?
This is why we are meeting these 14 times. To keep you from going off by yourself. This is why I would never do the whole class online like some people do, precisely for that reason, Miron, right? Because
so you don't accidentally become a eugenicist.
Exactly.
Just through some series of unfortunate events.
Exactly, Miron. So I'll miss you. Seeing you only 14 times doesn't seem enough.
I thank you.
So now it varies. If you look at the syllabus, it's constantly changing. There's no fixed day, right? Because I don't know. So you have, for example, just look at your syllabus, and each time you see YouTube, that means you're listening to it on YouTube. The only time we're showing up is when you have page numbers, and assignments. So it's about once a week, but sometimes we meet twice a week, you know what I mean? It's 4 times a month, but sometimes twice a week and then a week off and then twice a week and so forth. Are you guys sure you're cool with this arrangement? Really? Wow, who's not cool with this arrangement? Maybe I have just class for you. Anybody not cool with this? For real? Silence, okay. All right, so we'll do that. Now, guess what? I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to dismiss you, put a lecture online, and you're going to listen to it. Because this is the introduction to, what are we doing? Song of Songs? So I'm going to right now put it on the playlist, right? By the way, you now have access to the playlist through Blackboard. It's just when you go to the section recorded lectures, you go there, boom, you're in the playlist. Don't go there immediately. Give me 5 minutes to put it on, right? I'm going to put it on, and then we're going to